Got it.
All right, welcome Steve Riley, LA Guns. How are you today?
I'm doing good, brother. It's good to be on your show.
Oh yeah, always, man. Rock forever. You've been doing it for so long, man. You're an inspiration to us all. And I know
Thank you
when
so
I
much.
know when you came out here, in the '70s, you had that rock and roll dream, man. And from Steppenwolf into WASP. Talk a little bit about the audition process. How exactly did you join WASP?
You know what? I was doing a bunch of session work. I'd started recording in '75 with when I was very young. I did an album with Todd Rundgren, and I did a bunch of one-off albums all the way up to like about 82, 83, right in there. And in '83, I was doing a bunch of sessions out here in LA, and I got a call to join Keel right before they did The Right to Rock with Gene Simmons.
Yeah.
And I got the gig, and I did the album with Keel. And when we finished that album, we were still in the studio and getting ready to mix it. And I got a call from Blackie, and he asked me to come over to his apartment and talk to him. And I felt like I was in a great situation with Keel. I was in on A&M Records. I was with Gene Simmons, and the album was sounding great. And when I went over to meet Blackie, he had told me that they just finished recording their first album. They were doing their first album while I was recording The Right to Rock with Keel. And he said that they let their drummer go before the album was even packaged or put out. And would I be interested in joining? And he laid out the whole thing. They were with Iron Maiden management, and they were getting ready to go over to Europe to tour with Maiden and do all this stuff. And it was a very difficult decision. I was in a great situation with Keel, but I was getting offered this even better situation. And it was a tough call, but I had to make it. And I think I made the right call. I went over and I played with Wasp, and they wanted me to do it. And I did it, and I left Keel to go do Wasp, and it wasn't a bad call. I think I did the right thing.
No, all in all, you've had an incredible resume. Matter of fact, little fun fact, I was the original manager of Steeler. So before they
No
turned into
way.
Keel, I managed Ron and the boys. And yesterday we had a little 40th anniversary celebration. They re-released a lot of that early Steeler stuff, when they first
Right.
came out here to Hollywood. Ron came out from Nashville, actually, but
Yes.
no question that was a step up. Now, one thing I want to talk about before we get to the new album, Renegades and Crawl and Well-Oiled Machine and all that, is it's an interesting neighborhood we live in here. A lot of
Yeah.
people think of Hollywood, but true to fact, this North Hollywood, Burbank, Studio City, Van Nuys area is got a lot of rock and roll history. There's a lot of
Yeah, it does.
studios and music and rehearsals, and talk a little bit about that. I know you choose to live in this area, and of course, Mates right up the street is where everybody rehearses. Guns N' Roses and you name it, Slash, System of a Down, everybody. But when you met with Blackie, was he still living out in this area, North Hollywood, Burbank?
I was in Hollywood at the time. I had, when I first moved out here in '77, I set up shop in Hollywood, and I stayed in Hollywood until like about, I gotta say, like, it had to be like the early '80s when I moved out to the Valley. So when Blackie called me, he was still on Las Palmas Avenue in Hollywood in a small apartment. And we were all in Hollywood. The whole WASP crew was in Hollywood. And when I moved out to the Valley, I was already in LA Guns. So,
Okay.
but I had already been out here so many times. I'm such good friends with Bobby over at Mates.
Yeah,
And in fact, that's where we did the pre-production for Renegades. We did it at Mates.
of course.
And yeah, there's so much history out here. So many people live out here in the Valley. I wasn't really familiar with the Valley in general I knew about mates and a bunch of studios out here that I would come and work with. I didn't realize how many rockers lived out here in the valley. And yeah, this Toluca Lake, Studio City area, there are a lot of rockers out here and a lot of history too.
Yeah, it's really for no one that's been to LA, they just know the word Hollywood, but they really don't know. So much of it is right over the hill, right through
That's
the
right.
Cahuenga Pass here. But
Absolutely.
I remember early on, I did some promotions and stuff with WASP, and they actually even rehearsed at a little rehearsal hall over in Burbank, like right in one of those little industrial areas.
That's
Which
right.
should
That's
Randy
exactly right.
Piper and I'm sure Tony Richards was still in the band at the time, but
You know what, where it was too, and that's where I went and joined them. It was over in the Empire area, and it was before they built the shopping center
yeah,
over on Empire, and we rehearsed right off of one of those streets, and we had a big room over there, and that's where we were rehearsing all the time out here in the valley.
that's it. That's it. Well, obviously that original band, with Chris Holmes, Randy Piper, and Blackie, as you've always said, that was a classic lineup. You had Rod Smallwood management, you had Capitol Records. On paper, that's an all-star team. You're going for the Super Bowl, with a stacked deck. Tell us any of those stories about, obviously Chris Holmes is a colorful character, the
Yeah.
animal that he is, and Randy Piper also. Tell us about your early recollections of working with those two guitarists, because we know Blackie and the band's just been Blackie ever since, but that original lineup with those characters, what can you tell us about them?
Oh, it was just a great band, bro. It was, we were not only theatrically great, we were sonically great, and we had great songs. We were so good live and had such good chemistry that the twin guitar attack that Randy and Chris had was special because we had one guy that had sort of a Billy Gibbons type of feel with Randy Piper, and then we had Chris who had sort of an Eddie Van Halen type of feel. And the combination of those two was really, really important for that early Wasp sound. And Randy was very important to the band because he not only played half or even more than half the leads, that he was the second vocalist on all of the material. So that whole thing with those two together and their contrasting styles, it made that early Wasp sound really, really special. And so when Randy was fired from the band, it was a very big, big part of the band sounding different from Electric Circus on. And I just think people should know how important he was to that early Wasp sound. And like I said, that twin guitar attack from Chris Holmes and Randy Piper was a special sound. I loved it.
Yeah, well, you obviously moved on since then to LA Guns, but was it a control issue? I mean, obviously, one by one, everybody, left WASP, and I don't even know who's in the band now, besides Blackie. But was that the downfall? And we're not here to blast him, but you look at a situation that should have been, much bigger and greater. But did it come down to a situation where you think he really wanted to micromanage and control every bit of that?
He already had that. He was already the leader of the band. He was already the chief songwriter of the band. And Chris Holmes, too, had written a lot of the material. But the thing was that slowly but surely he dismantled that band. He fired Randy, and then he fired me, and then he fired Chris eventually. And I don't know what his thinking was, but he had a great band with colorful characters. Everybody had their own little thing that they brought to the band. And it was one of the big regrets I have in my life that band didn't stay together, because I thought that we could have gone on for a long time. And I thought that the characters and the talent that was in that band. It wasn't that he got eventually terrible players, because he always has great players around him, but he didn't have that chemistry and the characters that he had with the early Wasp. And I don't know what his thinking was, but when I got fired, I was the second one, Randy first, and then me. I was fortunate enough to have a bunch of guys that were Wasp fans. These LA Guns guys and these Guns N' Roses guys too, they were real big fans of Wasp. And I didn't know the GNR guys were, but I knew the LA Guns guys were. And they knew that I was out of Wasp, and they had done the same thing that Wasp did. They had finished their first album while I was recording Live in the Raw. They were recording the first LA Guns album. They let their drummer go right after they recorded the album. It was such a similar situation, and I was one of the fortunate guys. They loved the band I was in. They loved my drumming. Asked me if I wanted to join, and I was able to go from one band, Wasp, right into LA Guns, and it was, a stroke of good luck for me too.
Yeah. Well, you look back at that era with Guns N' Roses and Motley Crue and Rat, Poison, obviously Quiet Riot and all that.
Right.
You look at a group like Motley Crue, it's still those four guys. I mean, they could have easily got a better singer than Vince, but it would have changed the chemistry.
That's exactly
Motley
right.
Crue is that.
Yes, it would have it changed the chemistry, and the whole thing is that there's very few bands that could stay together, and Motley's one of them, and I have nothing but respect for Motley, and for them staying together and riding out tough times and just doing it. And the thing is that it doesn't always happen for bands, and it didn't happen for LA Guns or Wasp for the original band, the members to stay together. But it doesn't happen for every band, and Motley was one of those bands that it did happen.
Sure. Well, with LA Guns, you've worked with some of the greatest, producers out there, and over your years, with Tom Werman and of course Rundgren and Andy Johns. I know Andy Johns was a big part of your life, and for those that don't know, Andy Johns was part of that English royalty, with his brother. He was right in there in the mix, with all those classic Zeppelin albums from Zeppelin 2 all the way through Physical Graffiti, and of course with the Stones, Exile on Main Street, and the Free album, with Paul Rodgers and everything. What was it about, Andy Johns, made him so special? I know he knew how to get a good sound, and he was a bit of a character, but, tell us, for those that didn't have the pleasure of knowing Andy or working with him, what made him special?
You know what? That he was always on a list of people that we wanted to work with. And I've been fortunate. I've worked with so many good producers, from Todd Rundgren to Tom Werman to Gene Simmons, and a bunch of really great producers. And when we got the chance to work with Andy Johns, it was a dream for all of us. We just loved his catalog of music that he's done. And obviously, like you just mentioned, he's done and worked with just about everybody, and a lot of our favorite musicians. And so when we got to work with him, it was something like a dream come true for us. And so we did that first album, Waking the Dead, with Andy, and his reputation is what it is. He is that crazy rocker, and he just has a great way of working in the studio. He's a musician himself, so he knows how to work with musicians. And when we got to work with him on the first album, we obviously wanted to do the next album and the next album with him. And we ended up breaking a record in his own book, he had never worked with a band on 4 consecutive albums. And we did that with him, and I became really, really good friends with Randy. I learned so much, even though I had a lot of catalog myself that I had already done. working with Andy was special, and I got to learn a lot in the studio. And I brought that to Renegades. I produced Renegades, and I ended up, Andy sadly had passed away, or we probably would have called him. But the thing was that when we got to do Renegades, I got to bring a lot of the stuff in the studio that I had picked up with Andy. I used the same engineer, the same studio, and the same approach that he would have used on this album. And, you know, I got to tell you, that's one of my highlights of my career is working with Andy Johns.
Yeah, well, I know you tried to replicate as much as you could with the studio and the engineer and all of that. So I'm sure he was in the room in spirit, you know, in making
Absolutely.
Renegades.
Absolutely, brother. I tell you what, doing 4 albums with somebody in a row, you really, really become close. You really watch their technique, and you take their suggestions. You know, he's somebody that when he would suggest something, you'd really take it to heart. It wasn't something you wanted to tug back and forth and say, well, why are you suggesting it? You just wanted to try his suggestion. You wanted to check it out, whatever he was commenting on or suggesting. And it was a gas working with him. It was just tremendous. And yeah, a lot of people had a tough time with Andy because he was such a character. But I thought it was a gas. I thought his whole thing, his whole thing that he brought in the studio, the wild manner about himself, and then the knowledge of working in studios, I just took it to heart and I just went with it. I ran with it with them, and I became very close with Andy Johns.
Well, I'm sure with him, it was very much about the feel. You know, like you said, if he was going to suggest something, it was about his instinct. He had worked on so many thousands of recordings. It was the feel he felt, you know, that maybe this might work better.
Absolutely. And that's why, you know, if you had a brain in your head and you're working with somebody who's such a knowledgeable guy, that you really want to take his suggestions and his feel, and you want to explore it. You want to go with it before saying no, 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 no. I have my own way of doing things. He didn't want to do that with Andy. He wanted to try out what and usually his suggestions, I say, 80 to 90% of them were like, yeah, you know what, that was great. I'm glad you suggested that. And I ended up going with that. Even if I was thinking about playing a drum part, if he suggested doing something else, I tried it, bro, and it worked. And it was something that I had fun doing. And you leave your ego at the door with Andy and you go with the master. You go with what he's talking about.
Yeah, well, his legacy and resume speaks for itself, and
Sure
I know
does.
it carries over to Renegade. So we've heard Crawl, we've heard Well-Oiled Machine. We can't wait to hear more. I know it's just that, you know, situation now of just trying to figure out the best time and all of that. And you're dealing with the independent label now, Golden Robot, out of Australia. What is the best pros? You know, I mean, back in the day, you had bigger budgets, you had this bigger machine, but now these are people that truly care about what they're doing. They're not just signing a bunch of acts that they, you know, throwing against the wall. They're really trying to make this work. What is the pros of the new paradigm? You know, being independent and not being able to mess around in the studio, getting right down to it.
Well, the label head, Mark Alexander Erber, he is somebody that really believes in us, and he really, really loves the band and is a fan of LA Guns. He was a fan of this new material that we put together for Renegades, and he had a nice plan for how he wanted to release this. We obviously are with everybody else. Our gigs have moved all over the place in 2020 because of the virus, and we had a full schedule of gigs that we were going to do, and they all got moved to start up in August again, and those are even looking dodgy. So this plan of how we're releasing singles off of Renegades is Mark's plan, and it's working really well with what we're dealing with this COVID-19. We released Crawl in April. We're releasing another single that we just had come out, Well-Oiled Machine. And because our dates might move back another a bunch, I don't know if they're even going to come off in 2020. A lot of them are moving to the next year. So we might even release another single before the album is fully released in the fall. And the physicals will be all done, the LPs and the CDs. So those will be all done for the fall too, for those to come out. And I got to tell you, brother, we're really lucky. We decided to do this album at the end of 2019, and there was talk where we'll record it in 2020. If we had went that route, we would have been screwed. There was no way. We got guys living all over the country. I'm in LA, Kelly's in New York, Scotty Griffin's in Vegas, and Kurt Froelich, the singer's in Florida. So if we had decided to do this year, it would have been nearly impossible. We wouldn't have been able to do it just because of what's going on with traveling and people getting together. I mean, studios open. So we made a real good call, and we finished this at the end of 2019. And we're one of the few bands that has a full album to work this year. And so what we're doing is we're trying to work it as a album that is got a few singles, and then the whole thing comes out. I can't wait for everybody to hear the whole album. It's such a deep album, and we've got some great material on here. And everybody in the band has such a great chemistry, and we put the album together with such a great feel. And I'm really looking forward to everybody to hearing the whole album, man. But there's a good chance you might hear another single after Well-Oiled Machine, and then the full album in the fall.
Yeah.
We'll wait to see what goes on with these dates. We don't know about these dates that are still scheduled. They're moving all over the place.
Yeah. Well, I know as this unit came together, it started with the M3 date, so it was more of a touring unit than a recording unit. And now you've obviously done an amazing album, and you've got to kind of look at the future recording, you know, while you sit here and wait in this holding pattern, you know, for the touring. Are you guys already starting to put together ideas for a follow-up record? Because everybody's kind of, you know, hunkered down. Are there a lot of, you know, woodshedding going on?
Yeah, you know what? I tell you what, when we started putting Renegades together, we had to utilize the internet because we all live all over the place, and we knew that the budget was short, so we needed to do a nice pre-production via the internet and exchanging ideas, exchanging full songs that all four of us had written, and maybe we wanted to work on those. So we did 2 months of that. And then we had the guys come out here for 9 days, and we recorded it. I mixed it for 5 days and mastered it for a day. So it was like a 2-week, maybe 2.5-week thing that we did. We have so much material in the can already because of doing that pre-production. We handed in a lot of material on our own. And I know now that all four of us are songwriters, and we have a wealth of material. What we're doing with this album right now is unfamiliar territory by releasing a single, another single, another single before the full album comes out. We might be into 2021 with the album still being fresh, yeah, and us able to go out and support it. But we've already talked about a second album in 2021, and there's no worries about material at all. We have a ton of material. We have a great system to work out here in LA with the mates and the studios that we use. And so, you know, I think that doing another album is definitely on the books. We don't know when. We'd like to go out and support this album or with some shows, you know, and go out and play these songs at live shows. But Mark over at Golden Robot has already asked us about more material, and we've got it. We're ready to do it next year for sure.
Yeah, well, I know you're making the most of these opportunities. You got a great album, in the can, ready to come out whenever. And certainly the band is ready to slay them live, when that happens. All of us here at Rock Forever, like I mentioned last time, we have a global music conference we do right here in NoHo every August. We moved it to late September this year now, and
Sure.
it will be socially distanced and all that. But we do a thing called the IES Honors, where we've inducted, everybody, the Zeppelins and the Metallicas and the Megadeths and the Crews and all that. And we're going to invite you, and hopefully you can come up the block and make
I would love
a little
to.
appearance, because we want to
Oh,
put a
totally.
plaque in your hand, from Keel to Wasp to LA Guns, it's a legacy we want to still see grow, and want to show you some love from those of us in the music community that not only
Absolutely.
loves the music, but we want to keep it alive.
Oh man, I would love to come to that. And I think that's a great thing that you're doing right there. And it's great for the whole rock community. And I would love to attend that. And I just am thrilled that you've got something like that going on. It's great.
Yeah, well, we'll certainly be in touch. We look forward to getting the word out on this. And Steve, like I say, hopefully next time we'll be down there at Riverside and Cahuenga or somewhere, in front of Big Boys or something over there,
Right
seeing
on.
you live in person.
Absolutely, brother. And I really appreciate your support of all the music community and helping us support Renegades. I can't wait for you to hear the rest of the album. I am thrilled that you have connections with me, with Steeler and
Yeah.
Keel. That is just a gas that you go back to those times with me. And I look forward to meeting you in person. And I would love to attend your event.
Well, thanks again. Steve Riley is the man. LA Guns is the band. Renegades is the album. Go check out Wild Machine and Crawl, and can't wait for the full dose. Thanks again for joining us, Steve.
Thank you so much, my brother, for having me on. And please be safe right now, too.